Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you very much to the Initiative for Multilingual Studies for this invitation. In this talk, oops, there you go. I will describe a pedagogical development in bilingual and specifically Spanish as a heritage language education, but that can also be applied to other heritage language and second language contexts. I will also describe an assessment rubric based on the pedagogical approach described here and give examples, a few examples of it. So within foreign language programs in the US, minoritized varieties of non-English languages have been regarded racialized and intellectually inferior as racialized and intellectually inferior relics. These programs have been ill-equipped to foster the linguistic, cultural, and intellectual development of students who do not fit the profile of traditional upper middle class, considered L2 students in many programs, right? Currently, we have many challenges in language education. As educators, we know we are required to improve our teaching methods to make them more inclusive. However, we have achieved considerable progress in recent decades, moving towards sociolinguistic justice. Currently, we have a significant opportunity. We are in the middle of a renewed social movement, particularly affecting linguistics and education. Personally, as a researcher and educator, my aim is to explore approaches that others have found useful and beneficial within varying educational contexts, but that have not been fully implemented in language programs in higher education in the US, such as critical pedagogies. Excuse me, I don't see my PowerPoint. Such as critical pedagogies, engaged pedagogy, and culturally sustaining pedagogies. My methodological approaches include consideration of my capabilities and personal experiences, as well as my desire to see the world differently. I have been in education for more than 20 years. My background includes working in K-12 and literacy programs for adults and non-traditional students. I have worked in Educación Abierta in Mexico, and I have been an activist for education for youth, especially with problems of drugs and in gangs or gang membership. So this informs my pedagogical approaches and my research as well. However, I have not done this alone. I have had many partners in this journey, and particularly women who have been working with me and who have been hearing what I have to say and who have contributed as well to this pedagogical development. One of them is my dear colleague and friend, Munia Cabal Jimenez, who is currently an associate professor at Western Illinois University. My friend and colleague, Annalisa Taylor at the University of Oregon. Luz Idi Hernandez, who is currently developing Spanish as a heritage language program at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. We're together working, developing this pedagogical approach that I'm describing here today. I also want to acknowledge the working group for the Spanish as a heritage language program at the University of Oregon. I was the founding director from 2011, 2018. And that's why I started working with critical pedagogies and developing these innovative approaches. However, I want to acknowledge that currently the director is Dr. Sergio Loza, who is doing a fantastic job over there at the University of Oregon and working with this same group. And I'm looking forward to continue collaborating with them. So as an interinstitutional working group, through many meetings, workshops, and speaker events that constituted a portion of our long-term training, we agreed that we needed, first of all, To directly counteract the harmful effects of the social and institutional marginalization of Spanish heritage language students' confidence in their intellectual abilities and their academic progress. We also accepted that non-academic outcomes were as important as academic ones. From the beginning, students' racial identity and sense of belonging was a priority in our approach. Working towards sociolinguistic justice was one of our main goals. Sociolinguistic justice is defined as self-determination for linguistically subordinated individuals and groups in sociopolitical struggles over language. As an idealized goal, sociolinguistic justice is itself a site of a struggle, yet in general, linguistically marginalized individuals and communities can be seen as achieving some measure of sociolinguistic justice whenever they claim the right to define the social, cultural, and political roles of their own linguistic varieties. Sociolinguistic justice begins at the local level, and it emerges contextually from individual community members' main concerns with the potential of creating larger social change. Drawing from their own experiences with their own community-based program, these authors propose 5 potential goals that can advance sociolinguistic justice by challenging language ideologies that prevent society's valorization of linguistic varieties and their speakers. These sociolinguistic, the 5 goals for sociolinguistic justice are linguistic valorization, legitimation, inheritance, access, and expertise. And we were taking all of these into account in developing this pedagogical approach. The first 2 are very important. The current consensus among most linguistic scholars and language educators is that linguistic valorization must be among the main goals of every language classroom and curriculum. We, or most of us, agree with these 2. Similarly, there is an explicit rejection to eradicationist approaches which seek to implement the use of standard varieties in order to eradicate the students' non-standard varieties. Most of us agree on this. However, we cannot have one without the other. It is difficult for language learners, particularly heritage language students, to feel welcome, and they may suffer from anxiety while trying to negotiate their identities in public spaces that do not consider them as legitimate speakers. Norman Fairclough uses the term appropriateness model to describe a pedagogical approach in which students are instructed to develop language awareness for using a certain variety for one context and other varieties for other contexts, or as appropriate. These approaches have demonstrated that throughout this discourse runs the common theme of deficit, the notion that youth of color lack the language, the culture, the family support, the academic skills, even the moral character to succeed and excel. Educators must not only promote linguistic valorization, but also advocate for the validity of students' full linguistic repertoires in a wide range of social contexts, including not only the domestic, but also formal and public domains. And this is where there is a current debate. So Norman Fairclough proposes the model of critical language awareness that allows educators and learners to critically study how power relations work implicitly through language. Critical language awareness allows us to deconstruct ideologies behind language forms. And I will say that it allows us to deconstruct the emotions behind language forms, right? We are so invested emotionally in these forms as correct many times, and so many times we harm students because of this emotional investment in these ideologies. Related to this, there is linguistic inheritance. Linguistic inheritance as a third goal for sociolinguistic justice is particularly significant among heritage language students who have strong sociocultural and political ties to their inherited and ancestral languages, and among those who seek to reconnect with their family and or cultural background. While the right of all individuals to learn and speak their heritage varieties has been much discussed within linguistics, of equal importance is the right to reconnect to a lost or disappearing linguistic heritage without necessarily gaining full mastery, as well as the right to draw on this heritage only selectively or not at all. We see here in these goals for sociolinguistic justice, the common topic of agency. This is similar for the fourth goal, linguistic access. Linguistic access encompasses the ability to learn and or learn about the languages, dialects, and styles of sociopolitical power, and to support others' knowledge and learning of these varieties to the extent each individual chooses, not the teacher or educators, but the learner. However, critical pedagogy-based instruction must not continue to be understood as anything goes, right? Many times I have heard so many times people telling me, but there is going to be anarchy in the classroom. Anything is valid. Well, this is a fallacy. This is not true. Teacher and student agency does not equal anarchy in the classroom. Allowing for teacher and student agency should be understood as a commitment to continuous self-reflection. As Joe observes, critical literacy acknowledges multiple axes of knowledge and difference production. Teachers must become border crossers along with their students. Teacher cannot engage in students' transformation without first moving beyond the teacher's self, allowing disagreement, disharmony, and dissonances within the self and with students. This means that it's a difficult path, but we must have these difficult conversations to move forward. This means also that literacy is socially constructed. Literacy cannot only be understood solely in descriptive terms, but must also be conceptualized within a complex societal context in which those who have access to literacy obtain knowledge, values, and opportunities. Literacy is usually taken to refer not only to the ability to understand written and printed inscriptions, but also to the socio-cognitive changes that result from being literate, from having a literate population. Literacy alone has not promoted social transformation and more consciousness. And this is, of course, maybe due to the ideology of school literacy, which is no longer part of the common culture developed during the last 150 years, that led ordinary people with less control over their own cultural production. So this is something to take into account, that this promise of social promotion doesn't occur for a lot of people, especially people marginalized within the schooling system. Crucial for the relationship between language and schooling is the indexical approach. And this has been developed within approaches in linguistic anthropology. Theoretical work in these fields shifted from centering on formal linguistic structures comprised by abstract grammar and referential semantics and language use to a different paradigm. One of the most significant critiques of the field of linguistics broadly, and sociolinguistics in particular, has been that of scientism as the advent of theories based on the conception of human subjects as objects of investigation at the expense of ignoring the materiality of subject studies studied by the social scientists and vice versa. In an indexical approach, language is considered as a socially organized phenomenon, And meaning is not a solely property of language, but it is situated and negotiated in social context. Indexical processes convey social meaning by direct association between signs and context. The notion of context frames the event being analyzed and offers the information for the suitable interpretation. And this is related to linguistic expertise, the fifth goal for sociolinguistic justice. Linguistic expertise should rely on the conception that all language users are linguistic experts, and that literacy in normative varieties and styles has historically and politically depended upon socially constructed configurations in education. Let's go from the abstract notions in sociolinguistics and linguistic anthropology to the classroom. So we may agree or disagree in these theoretical concepts, but how do we apply these things in the classroom? So I'm going to give an example of this, and it has to do with indexicality and language social meanings. In this activity that we created and edited as a team, we are centering on the context. And the title is Fijémonos en el contexto for Spanish general class, introductory, could be adapted also for higher levels like a class in Spanish in the US or a general class in sociolinguistics. So for the first step, working with a partner, look in the dictionary for a synonym for each word. And we have a list of words that are long words from Nahuatl. And we want students to find the synonym in the dictionary and maybe even the meaning in a translation. And in the third column, in this exercise in column C, they will write any other type of information they find about the region or the context where people use these words. So as you can see, and in this example, of course, it is just an excerpt, right? The list is longer, maybe a 10 word list, and you can expand it and you can adapt it to other contexts. It could be another context like Español Andino or Spanish in the US with long words from English. You can situate it in the context of your own community and students. And as you can see here, the students have two lists that are apparently synonyms, right? But in the step 2, we ask students to write two types of texts. In the first one, we give them a quote unquote informal context where we ask them to write maybe a text message or an email to a friend or family member. And in the second text, we ask them to use a quote unquote formal context, and they have to write a note, maybe for the newspaper or for another, let's say, formal context where they have to use quote unquote more standard language. Okay, so as you may have anticipated, students picked more words from column A, from the quote unquote informal context, and more words from the column B for quote unquote formal context. In a traditional class where we emphasize language awareness, we stay there, right? And we tell them, very good, yes, you don't use guajolote for a formal note, that is very informal, etc., etc. With critical language awareness and with decolonial knowledge, with a decolonial approach and socio-historical political knowledge discussed in the classroom, we move beyond that. And we discuss why. Why are we using words from indigenous origins or long words or even less adapted forms for informal context? where does that idea come from, etc., right? So you get the idea. We need to question these and then give the students the agency to use these words as they choose. But they have to justify it, not just, again, it's not anarchy, right? Like, oh yeah, anything goes, you choose whatever, you like red color or blue color. No, you have to justify it and explain me why you think that in your community these would go better, right, if you communicate with this vocabulary or these forms. For example, usually, especially in Oregon and in the context of California, students have told me that zacate is valid everywhere, formally, informally, that's the word they use, and who knows who used césped. Césped is like, what is that? So you may find different uses, but the important thing here is to discuss the context. And the meaning. So as a conclusion here, we know that column A and column B are not synonyms, right? They convey different social meanings depending on the context and depending on the community. So based on previous research on stylistic variation and theories of indexicality, and recognizing the ways in which existing language awareness of speakers in relation to ideologies operates, I propose a critical sociocultural linguistics literacy. CSLL, as a conglomerate of critical approaches, has evolved within a research and pedagogical team to allow language students to exercise their own sociolinguistic agency and negotiate their own processes of identity formations within their own particular context. And this approach builds on the notions of CLA, LA, as I explained, other similar approaches like classroom-based dialect awareness, sociolinguistics and translanguaging for critical literacy, capabilities for community engagement, and I cannot emphasize this aspect enough. It is not only important that we discuss these things in the classroom, but outside of it and in the community, and conducting service learning as well, and current developments in racial linguistics. And this last point is very important, even at the earliest stages of language programs. We concluded syllabi should include metalinguistic content centered on the development of critical competence so that communication skills are understood to be more than the acquisition of technical abilities. CSLL challenges researchers, educators, and learners to analyze ethno-racial, gender, and class antagonisms that only become comprehensible when analyzing intersectional social structures. CSLL goes beyond the social critique present in original critical pedagogies and CLA approaches based on Marxist class-based analysis, in the sense that it acknowledges multifaceted intersectional identity formation, as well as multiple opportunities across campus and in the community toward literacy and language development. And that's why the approach of racial linguistics is very important here, because we have to contextualize. So speaking also in terms of literacy encompasses a more complete approach. Another important thing that I want to talk about in this talk is the assessment. From the beginning, our team understood that we were attempting to ensure linguistic validation, legitimation, inheritance, access, and expertise. However, we could not ensure these goals for sociolinguistic justice without changing our assessment practices. Evaluations in our program courses were all based on the topics that we included in our original and compiled materials that we were creating. Yet, the assessment methodology was still based on traditional language teaching models based let's say on a white logic, as Suberi and Bonilla Silva have stated or proposed the white logic concept. Students were evaluated not only on the content seen in class, but also on their linguistic forms and standard performance, including correct spelling and grammaticality. So it didn't matter, right? Like we were like teaching them to be critical and everything, but the assessment was still the same. Thus, while still developing this critical pedagogy-based curriculum, I proposed a general rubric that was later adapted for each class. And let me tell you, this was a very difficult process that consciously questioned the traditional learning objectives in language courses, but at the same time, genuinely transformed our pedagogical practices. And I cannot emphasize this enough. How were we able to do this? Well, we took, as you may know, the can-do statements for in the ACTFL guidelines, and we transformed them for CSLL. How does this look like? Well, we took 4 principles for the statements, and these were language ideologies, historical events and contexts, complex social dynamics and power structures, and the social meanings expressed through different sociolinguistic styles. And this is how they look in a can-do statement. For example, number 1, I can identify implicit language ideologies in cultural products and practices. So this one in the rubrics look like this. For example, the first one, I can identify implicit language ideologies in cultural products and practices. One more specific way would be, I can identify attitudes towards language and their underlying ideologies as represented in popular culture. For example, in a song, or a video, a movie, right? The second one can be more specifically stated as, I can explain how contact with other languages can contribute to language variation. For the third one, the complex social dynamics of power and structures in linguistic communities, one example could be, I can explain the difference between prescriptive and descriptive approaches to analyzing language. So as you can imagine, these correspond to the many activities we developed, in which they first learn about, okay, what is prescriptive, what is descriptive approaches in linguistics and language ideologies in popular beliefs about language, etc., etc. For the last one, one specific statement would be, I can describe and give examples of the ways in which language varies in different styles. And here I brought my research with the fresas, the Valley girls in Mexico, and developed a whole unit on different styles in Mexico, for example, with the upper class women or people who wanna be upper class and who speak with within the culture of whiteness or the system of whiteness in Mexico, and who are often called whitexicans. So this statement would be perfect for that activity, to assess that activity. And also it emphasizes agency among students. It is important to notice that this rubric does not limit students' linguistic access. After CLL-based instruction, students decide the varieties they prefer to use according to their own assessment of a particular sociopragmatic, stylistic, and ideological context. This does not mean that students will not learn standard varieties. Students learn academic styles, but as privileged varieties, and critically analyzing the wide logic behind their configurations. Critical literacy engages students in challenging all content viewed in class and reflecting on the different and often contradictory perspectives, reframing language education so that it fully serves students, particularly those who have been minoritized, should no longer be a matter of choice. The first steps toward achieving these goals as educators committed to sociolinguistic justice is to fully explore our own biases and linguistic ideologies in relation to race, ethnicity, class, gender, ability, sexuality, and indigeneity, among many others, and to reevaluate how these beliefs inform our educational practices, our assessment measures, and our adherences to paradigms of social hierarchies in general. I also want to mention that we are moving forward, we're making more connections as a team, and currently we have more collaborations, and I'm very excited about this. Currently, we are collaborating as a team with dear colleague and friend, Eve Higbee at Cal State East Bay, and Ph.D. candidate Evelyn Gomez, and Noelia Sanchez Walker, working with Spanish second language acquisition and teacher education, and our colleague Cristina Mostacero Pinilla in Dominican University in Chicago. I'm very excited about this. I also want to thank and acknowledge my colleague Covadonga Lamar Prieto, who very kindly has invited me to collaborate at the Spanish of California lab at the University of California, Riverside, where I work right now. And I'm so grateful for the PhD students working with us in this collaboration and with their projects that overlap with these pedagogical approaches being developed. Thank you very much. You can find all the materials and the rubrics that I talk about in this talk in this webpage.